Human Janitor taught disabled dragon prince to box against bullies. Unaware the Emperor watched. Before we dive into this story, drop a quick hi in the comments and tell me where you're watching from. It really helps support the channel. The massive crystalline corridors of Drakenheim Imperial Academy gleamed under the 3 moons of Neva Prime. Within these hallowed halls, the future leaders of the Drakari Empire learned the art of governance, warfare, and diplomacy, unless you were Prince Vorax, the youngest son of Emperor Talgoth. Miles Harper wiped sweat from his brow as he pushed his cleaning cart through the Academy's eastern wing. 6 months into his contract as the only human janitor on a planet of dragon-like humanoids, and he still wasn't used to the scorching ambient temperature. The Drakari preferred it hot, real hot, and Miles had learned to wear the lightest possible uniform Drakenheim maintenance staff regulations would allow. "Mr. Harper," a young voice called out, the words slightly slurred. Miles turned to see Prince Vorax emerging from the shadow of a massive pillar. Unlike most Drakari whose scales shimmered with metallic hues of gold, silver, or copper, the young prince's scales were dull gray with patches missing entirely, revealing pink, vulnerable skin beneath. His left arm hung limply at his side, noticeably thinner than his right, and his gait was uneven as he approached. "Hey there, Your Highness," Miles said, leaning on his mop. "Aren't you supposed to be in combat training right now?" The young prince's frills drooped slightly. "Master Zarkin exempted me again." He tried to sound casual, but the hurt in his voice was unmistakable. Miles knew the story. Prince Vorax had been born with a rare genetic condition that affected his scale development and left him with partial paralysis on his left side. In a culture that prized physical perfection and combat prowess above all else, the 12-year-old prince was considered an embarrassment, a stain on the imperial bloodline. "Well, their loss is my gain," Miles said cheerfully. "Want to help me polish the memorial statues in the Hall of Champions? I've got an extra rag." The prince's eyes brightened. "Actually, Mr. Harper, I was hoping you might show me more of those movements you were practicing yesterday." Miles paused. Yesterday, thinking he was alone in the Eastern Training Hall after hours, he'd gone through his old boxing routine, a remnant of his college days when he'd been a middleweight champion before life, death, and an interstellar work program had led him to this strange new world. "You saw that, huh?" Miles rubbed the back of his neck. It was magnificent. Vorax's eyes widened with genuine admiration. "You moved so differently from our combat masters. No fiery breath techniques or tail strikes, yet you looked formidable." Miles couldn't help but smile at the earnestness in the young dragon's voice. "That's just boxing, Your Highness. It's an earth combat sport. Nothing fancy like your Drakari flame techniques." "Could you?" Vorax hesitated, his good hand nervously tracing the bare patches on his forearm. "Could you teach me?" Miles looked around the empty corridor, then checked his watch. He still had 3 halls to clean before his shift ended, but something in the prince's expression, a mixture of hope and resignation, as if already expecting rejection, tugged at his heart. "Tell you what," Miles said, lowering his voice. "Meet me in the Eastern Training Hall at 2100 hours, after my shift. We'll see what you can do." The smile that spread across Vorax's face made his dull scales seem suddenly brighter. "I'll be there." The prince gave an awkward bow before scampering off, his uneven gait echoing down the crystalline corridor. Miles watched him go, shaking his head. "What are you getting yourself into, Harper?" he muttered to himself as he returned to mopping. Unbeknownst to either of them, from the shadows of an adjoining corridor, a figure observed their interaction with calculating eyes. That evening, Miles arrived at the Eastern Training Hall 15 minutes early to set up. He'd fashioned makeshift training mitts from old cleaning pads and found a roll of bandages in the medical bay to wrap the prince's hands. He doubted the Drakari physiology would allow for perfect human boxing technique, but he could adapt. The door slid open precisely at 2100 hours, and Prince Vorax entered, wearing a simple training tunic rather than his usual ornate royal garments. "I managed to slip away during the evening meditation," the prince explained, slightly out of breath. My brothers never notice when I'm missing anyway. Miles nodded, choosing not to comment on the sad implication. Let's get started then. First, let me see you make a fist with your right hand. The prince curled his clawed fingers inward, creating something between a fist and a claw. Not bad, but let's adjust. Miles guided the young Dracary's hand into a proper boxing position. You'll want to tuck your thumb outside, not inside. Otherwise, you'll break it on the first punch. Like this. Vorax adjusted, his scaled face screwed up in concentration. Perfect. Now, your stance. For the next hour, Miles worked with the prince on basic boxing fundamentals, stance, movement, and simple jabs. He was surprised at how quickly Vorax picked up the techniques, even with his physical limitations. The prince's left arm couldn't throw a proper punch, but Miles helped him use it defensively, teaching him to parry and block. Boxing isn't just about hitting hard, Miles explained as they practiced. It's about footwork, timing, and using your opponent's force against them. It's perfect for someone who might not have the most power, but has heart and smarts. That's me, Vorax said with a self-deprecating laugh. No power, just a brain that won't stop thinking. Hey, don't sell yourself short, Miles corrected him gently. You've got more heart than most fighters I've known. And that left arm of yours? We're going to make it your secret weapon. Secret weapon? The prince looked doubtfully at his weaker arm. How? Everyone will underestimate it. That gives us an advantage. Miles demonstrated a simple feint. Your opponents will focus on defending against your strong side, never expecting anything from your left. Even a weak jab can be effective if they don't see it coming. They continued training, Miles patiently correcting Vorax's form and encouraging his progress. By the end of the session, the young prince was executing a decent 1-2 combination and moving with more confidence than Miles had ever seen from him. Same time tomorrow? Vorax asked hopefully as they wrapped up, his scales glistening with exertion. Miles hesitated. He was already risking his job by giving private combat lessons to a royal prince. If the academy officials found out, he could be terminated, or worse, deported back to Earth. But looking at the prince's expectant face, he couldn't bring himself to say no. Same time tomorrow, he agreed. But you've got to promise me something. Anything. This stays between us. And you can only use these techniques for defense, not to start fights. Got it. The prince's frills flared with excitement. I swear on my imperial honor. As the days turned into weeks, their clandestine training sessions became the highlight of both their lives. Miles found himself looking forward to teaching the young prince, impressed by his determination and quick learning. Despite his disability, Vorax trained harder than any human student Miles had ever coached. They adapted traditional boxing to accommodate the prince's Dracari physiology and his physical limitations. Miles taught him to use his tail for balance, compensating for his weaker left leg, and developed specialized defensive techniques that played to Vorax's strengths. More importantly, Miles became a confidant to the lonely prince. During water breaks, Vorax would share stories of royal politics, his struggles with his demanding father, and the cruel taunts of his 3 older brothers, all perfect specimens of Dracari might. They call me half-scale when the teachers aren't listening, Vorax admitted one evening, his voice trying to sound casual despite the pain behind it. My brother Craxus is the worst. He's next in line for the throne and never lets me forget how worthless I am to the bloodline. Miles felt a surge of protective anger. Listen to me, Vorax. There's more to being a leader than having perfect scales or being able to breathe the hottest fire. The greatest strength is here. He tapped his temple, and here, he placed his hand over his heart. And you've got plenty of both. The prince looked up at him with such gratitude that Miles felt a lump form in his throat. Now show me that combination again, Miles said quickly, changing the subject. Remember to pivot on your back foot. On the 23rd day of their training, disaster struck. They were midway through their session when the door to the training hall slid open. Miles turned, expecting to see a maintenance droid or perhaps a curious student, but instead found himself face-to-face with 3 young Dracari males, all wearing the distinctive gold-trimmed tunics of the royal family. Well, said the tallest of the 3, his copper scales gleaming under the hall's lights. So this is where our little half-scale disappears to every night. Craxus, Vorax whispered, his voice tight with fear. Miles stepped forward. Your Highness, we were just. Silence, human. Craxus cut him off with a dismissive wave. I'm not speaking to the help. His cold gaze fixed on his younger brother. What would father say if he knew you were learning primitive human fighting techniques instead of proper Drakari combat arts? The other two princes snickered, their tails swishing in amusement. I'm allowed to train however I want, Vorax said, trying to sound confident despite his trembling voice. Are you? Craxus stepped further into the room, his movements predatory. A crippled prince learning crippled fighting from a species known throughout the galaxy for their weakness? How fitting. Miles bristled at the insult, but held his tongue. Interfering would only make things worse for Vorax. The human combat style suits me, Vorax replied, standing straighter. Master Zarkin said I could pursue alternative training. Did he now? Craxus exchanged glances with his brothers. Well, why don't you show us what you've learned, little brother? Temek, give Halfscale a proper sparring match. The middle brother stepped forward, cracking his knuckles. He was smaller than Craxus, but still towered over Vorax, his silver scales unmarred and his muscular frame intimidating. Your Highness, this isn't appropriate, Miles protested. Prince Vorax isn't ready for full-contact sparring yet. I wasn't asking your permission, Janitor, Craxus sneered. This is family business. Temek circled Vorax, his tail twitching in anticipation. Come on, Halfscale. Show me your human tricks. Miles watched helplessly as Vorax assumed the boxing stance they'd practiced, his good arm raised defensively. The young prince caught Miles's eye, and despite the fear visible on his face, there was something else there too, determination. Temek lunged without warning, a blur of silver scales. Vorax managed to slip the first strike, just as Miles had taught him, and countered with a quick jab to his brother's midsection. The blow connected, causing Temek to grunt in surprise. Lucky shot, Temek growled, his frills flaring in anger. What followed was brutal. Temek abandoned any pretense of a fair match and unleashed a barrage of strikes. Vorax defended admirably, using the techniques Miles had taught him, but he was outmatched in strength and experience. A sweeping tail strike knocked Vorax off balance, and Temek seized the advantage, pinning his younger brother to the ground. Pathetic, Craxus commented from the sidelines. This is what happens when you reject your heritage for alien nonsense. Miles couldn't stand by any longer. That's enough, he shouted, stepping forward. He's your brother, for God's sake. Craxus turned to him, eyes narrowing dangerously. You forget your place, human. You are nothing here, less than nothing. A maintenance worker who presumed to teach a prince. Your contract will be terminated immediately. Worth it, Miles replied without hesitation. At least I tried to help him instead of tearing him down. Something flashed in Craxus's eyes, perhaps respect, perhaps just surprise at the human's defiance. Before he could respond, a commotion erupted in the corridor outside. The training hall doors slid open with a decisive hiss, and several Imperial guards entered, their ceremonial armor gleaming. Behind them walked a towering Drakari whose scales shimmered with an iridescent black so deep it seemed to absorb the light around him. His presence filled the room like a physical force, and even Craxus straightened instinctively. Father, Craxus said, his voice suddenly formal. We were just. Silence. Emperor Talgatha's voice was like distant thunder. His gaze swept the room, taking in the scene. Vorax still on the ground, Temek standing over him, Miles frozen mid-intervention, and Craxus trying to look innocent. Miles felt his heart sink. Being fired was one thing. Facing the emperor of the entire Drakari civilization was quite another. He'd heard stories about Talgatha's legendary temper, how he once reduced an offending ambassador to ashes with a single breath. Rise, Vorax, the emperor commanded. The young prince scrambled to his feet, wincing as he put weight on his bad leg. Explain this, Talgath said, his piercing gaze moving between his youngest son and the human janitor. Vorax swallowed hard. Father, Mr. Harper has been teaching me to box. It's a human combat technique that works with my limitations. I see. The Emperor's expression revealed nothing. And you three? He turned to his older sons. Explain your presence. Craxus bowed deeply. We were concerned about Vorax, Father. When we discovered he was receiving unauthorized combat training from a human maintenance worker, we intervened for his safety and the honor of our family. Is that so? The Emperor's tail twitched slightly, the only indication of his mood. Temek, why was your brother on the ground when I arrived? Temek shifted uncomfortably. We were demonstrating proper Drakari combat techniques, Father. For his education. 3 against 1? Against a brother with a congenital disability? The Emperor's voice remained level, but the temperature in the room seemed to drop several degrees. Miles held his breath, certain he was about to witness royal family drama that no human was ever meant to see. Leave us, the Emperor suddenly commanded. All of you except Vorax and... He paused, looking at Miles. The human instructor. Craxus opened his mouth as if to protest, then thought better of it. With a final glare at Miles, he and his brothers exited the training hall, followed by the Imperial Guards. When the doors closed, an uncomfortable silence filled the space. Miles stood awkwardly, unsure if he should speak or wait to be addressed. Vorax looked equally uncertain, his gaze fixed on the floor. How long has this training been occurring? Emperor Talgoth finally asked, his voice surprisingly calm. 23 days, Father, Vorax answered promptly. I see. The Emperor turned to Miles. And you, human, you are a qualified combat instructor. Miles cleared his throat nervously. I was a collegiate boxing champion on Earth, Your Imperial Majesty. Not a professional instructor, but I know the fundamentals. Yet you took it upon yourself to train a prince of the Imperial bloodline. It wasn't a question, but Miles felt compelled to explain. Prince Vorax wanted to learn, sir. He's got natural talent, and the boxing style works well with his physical configuration. I didn't mean any disrespect to your traditions. The Emperor studied him for a long moment, his ancient eyes unreadable. Then, to Miles's surprise, he turned to his son. Show me. Father. Vorax looked up, startled. Show me what you have learned from this human. The basic movements. Vorax glanced at Miles, who gave him an encouraging nod. The young prince took a deep breath, centered himself, and assumed the boxing stance they had practiced countless times. He began to demonstrate the fundamental techniques, jab, cross, slip, weave, modified to accommodate his weaker left side. His movements were fluid and precise, showing weeks of dedicated practice. The Emperor watched in silence, his expression giving nothing away. When Vorax finished the demonstration, he stood awkwardly, awaiting judgment. Interesting, Emperor Talgoth said finally. It bears little resemblance to traditional Drakari combat arts. No, Father, Vorax agreed, his frills drooping slightly. Yet it appears effective, particularly for one with your specific challenges. The Emperor's gaze shifted to Miles. Human, what is your assessment of my son's abilities? Miles straightened, meeting the Emperor's eyes directly. Prince Vorax has more natural talent than most fighters I've ever trained with. He's disciplined, determined, and smart. His disability isn't a weakness. It's made him more creative and adaptable. With continued training, he could become exceptional. The young prince's head snapped up in surprise at the praise. Emperor Talgoth was silent for several heartbeats, his tail swishing thoughtfully. Then he did something utterly unexpected. He laughed. It was a deep, rumbling sound that seemed to shake the very foundations of the training hall. Do you know, maintenance worker Harper, that I have been watching these sessions? Miles felt his stomach drop. You have. The Emperor nodded. The Imperial Palace security system records all activities within the academy. When I noticed my youngest son's unusual pattern of movement in the training halls after hours, I became curious. Vorax looked as shocked as Miles felt. Father, I can explain. The Emperor held up a clawed hand, silencing him. For 23 days, I have observed. I have seen a human with no obligation to my son spend his free time patiently teaching him, encouraging him, believing in him when his own brothers, his own blood, saw only weakness. The Emperor's gaze returned to Miles. I have seen you defend him at risk to your own position here. Miles swallowed hard. He deserved someone in his corner, Your Majesty. Indeed. Emperor Talgoth turned back to his son. Vorax, tomorrow you will return to Master Zarkin's combat training. The young prince's shoulders slumped in defeat. And, the Emperor continued, maintenance worker Harper will accompany you as your personal combat trainer to continue these boxing lessons as a supplement to your regular training. Both Miles and Vorax stared at the Emperor in disbelief. But father, Vorax said hesitantly, the other instructors won't. They will accept it because I command it, Talgoth said simply. The Drakari Empire did not become the dominant force in this sector by clinging blindly to tradition. We adapt. We incorporate the strengths of others when it serves us. He looked at Miles with newfound respect. This human fighting style suits your physical configuration. It would be foolish to deny you training that maximizes your potential. Miles couldn't believe what he was hearing. Your Majesty, I'm honored, but I'm just a janitor with a work contract. I'm not qualified to be a royal trainer. Your contract will be modified, the Emperor said dismissively, as if changing an interstellar employment agreement was as simple as ordering dinner. Your primary duties will now include combat training for Prince Vorax, with appropriate compensation adjustments. Vorax's eyes were wide with disbelief and growing excitement. Thank you, father. The Emperor's expression softened almost imperceptibly as he regarded his youngest son. The throne requires strength, Vorax, but strength takes many forms. Perhaps it is time the Imperial family recognized this. He turned to leave, but paused at the door. As for your brothers, they will be joining your training sessions beginning tomorrow. I believe they could benefit from learning some humility from a human instructor. With that bombshell, Emperor Talgoth swept from the room, leaving Miles and Vorax staring at each other in stunned silence. Did that just happen? Miles finally asked. A slow smile spread across Vorax's face, making his dull scales seem suddenly radiant. I believe it did, Mr. Harper. Miles shook his head in amazement. Well, Your Highness, it looks like we've got our work cut out for us tomorrow. Your brothers aren't going to like taking orders from a human janitor. Former janitor, Vorax corrected, his good hand forming a perfect boxer's fist. Now you're the Imperial combat specialist. Miles laughed. Is that what I am now? It's what you've always been to me, the young prince said, his voice suddenly serious. Thank you, Miles. For everything. Miles felt a lump in his throat as he reached out to adjust the prince's stance one more time. Chin up, shoulders relaxed. Remember what I taught you about keeping your guard up? Against bullies? Vorax asked with a knowing smile. Against anyone who underestimates you, Miles replied. Now, let's run through that combination one more time before calling it a night. Something tells me tomorrow is going to be a very interesting day. As they resumed their training, Miles couldn't help but wonder at the strange turns life could take. 6 months ago, he'd been drowning in debt on Earth, taking the first off-world contract he could find. Now he was about to become a combat trainer to Drakari royalty. The universe, it seemed, had a peculiar sense of humor. And watching Prince Vorax execute a perfect combination, strength flowing through even his weaker side, Miles wouldn't have it any other way. The news of Miles Harper's promotion spread through Drakenheim Academy like wildfire. By morning, every student and instructor knew that the human janitor had been elevated to Imperial Combat Specialist, a position created specifically for him by Emperor Talgoth himself. The reactions were mixed. Many of the Drakari instructors were outraged at the idea of a human teaching their combat arts, while others were simply curious about what the Emperor had seen in this unremarkable maintenance worker. The students, particularly those who had witnessed Prince Vorax's struggles, watched with fascination as the drama unfolded. Miles arrived at Master Zarkin's training hall precisely at 0800 hours, wearing the new uniform that had been delivered to his quarters, a sleek black outfit with subtle Imperial insignia, far more dignified than his old maintenance coveralls. He felt distinctly out of place as he entered the massive arena where Drakari youths practiced their ancestral combat forms. Master Zarkin, an ancient Drakari with faded red scales and numerous battle scars, regarded Miles with open skepticism. "So, you are the human who has caught our Emperor's eye," he said, his voice like gravel. "I hope you realize the unprecedented nature of your position here." "I do, Master Zarkin," Miles replied respectfully. "I'm here to supplement your teaching for Prince Vorax, not replace it." Before the old combat master could respond, the Imperial princes entered the training hall. Craxus led the way, his copper scales gleaming and his expression thunderous. Behind him followed Temek and Draven, the third brother, both looking equally displeased. Prince Vorax entered last, his uneven gait more pronounced in the presence of his brothers, but his head held high. The four princes bowed to Master Zarkin, deliberately ignoring Miles. "Your Imperial Highnesses," Zarkin acknowledged them. "As you are aware, by decree of Emperor Talgoth, today's training will include instruction in human combat techniques. Maintenance worker, forgive me, combat specialist Harper will be leading this portion of your training." Craxus's frills flared in barely contained anger. "Father may have commanded our presence, but he cannot command our respect. The human will have to earn that." Miles met the Crown Prince's gaze steadily. "Fair enough, Your Highness. I wouldn't have it any other way." Master Zarkin gestured to the center of the training area. "The floor is yours, combat specialist." Miles stepped forward, acutely aware of the dozens of Drakari eyes watching his every move. Performance under pressure was nothing new to him. He'd fought in packed arenas during his boxing days, but the stakes felt considerably higher here. "Boxing," Miles began, his voice clear and confident, "is an earth combat discipline that focuses on striking with the fists while maintaining mobility and defensive awareness. It doesn't rely on superior strength or special abilities, making it adaptable to various physiologies and situations." He demonstrated a basic stance, then motioned for the four princes to mirror him. Vorax immediately complied, settling into the stance they'd practiced. His brothers followed with obvious reluctance, their movements deliberately sloppy. "Prince Craxus," Miles said, approaching the Crown Prince, "your back foot is too far inward. May I?" He gestured toward the prince's stance. Craxus's eyes narrowed, but he gave a curt nod. Miles carefully adjusted the prince's foot position, then his arm alignment. "This gives you better balance and power generation," Miles explained professionally. "Try throwing a straight right from this position." Craxus executed the punch with surprising precision, his natural athleticism evident. Despite himself, the Crown Prince looked slightly impressed at the power he generated. "Good," Miles nodded. "Now let's work on movement and defensive techniques." For the next hour, Miles led the princes through basic boxing drills, carefully adapting the techniques to accommodate Drakari physiology. He paid special attention to Vorax, but was careful not to show favoritism. To his surprise, all four brothers displayed natural aptitude for the discipline, though Craxus and Temek clearly resented taking instruction from a human. As they practiced, Miles noticed Master Zarkin watching with growing interest, his initial skepticism gradually shifting to grudging curiosity. "Now," Miles said as they reached the end of the session, "I'd like to demonstrate how these techniques can be applied in a practical situation. Prince Vorax, would you assist me?" The young prince stepped forward, a flicker of nervousness crossing his features. "Don't worry, I'm not going to hurt your favorite pet human," Craxus interjected with a smirk. "Let me demonstrate instead." Miles considered the challenge. Part of him wanted to protect Vorax from potential humiliation, but another part recognized this as an opportunity. "Actually," Miles said, "I'd like Prince Vorax to demonstrate the defensive techniques we've been practicing. Prince Craxus, if you're willing, you could test those defenses with controlled attacks." The Crown Prince's frills flared with interest. "Gladly." Master Zarkin stepped forward. "I will oversee this demonstration to ensure proper protocol." The brothers faced each other in the center of the training area. Craxus towered over Vorax, his perfect copper scales contrasting sharply with his younger brother's patchy gray ones. The size difference was dramatic. Craxus outweighed Vorax by at least 80 pounds of pure muscle. "Begin," Master Zarkin commanded. Craxus immediately launched a lightning-fast strike at his brother's head. To everyone's surprise, including perhaps Vorax himself, the younger prince slipped the punch exactly as Miles had taught him, shifting his weight to his stronger right leg and rotating his upper body just enough to let the blow sail past his ear. A murmur rippled through the observing students. Encouraged by the successful evasion, Vorax maintained his guard position, his good arm protecting his center line while his weaker left arm stayed up as a deterrent. Craxus pressed forward with a combination of strikes, each one powerful enough to end the demonstration if it connected cleanly. But Vorax was moving differently than anyone had ever seen. Gone was the awkward, uncertain prince who shuffled through combat training. In his place was a focused fighter who used his opponent's momentum and aggression against him, slipping, blocking, and occasionally countering with precise, economical movements. "Good, Vorax," Miles called out. "Remember your footwork. Create angles." The young prince pivoted on his strong leg, creating a new angle of attack that momentarily confused Craxus. In that split second of hesitation, Vorax landed a clean jab to his brother's midsection, not powerful enough to hurt, but precise enough to score. Craxus's eyes widened in genuine surprise, then narrowed in determination. What followed was no longer a demonstration, but a true contest. Craxus abandoned any pretense of restraint and attacked with the full arsenal of Drakari combat techniques, including a sweeping tail strike that would have taken Vorax's legs from under him had the younger prince not anticipated it and jumped backward. "Enough," Master Zarkin called out, stepping forward. This was to be a controlled demonstration, Prince Craxus. But before the combat master could intervene further, the training hall doors opened, and Emperor Talgoth entered, flanked by Imperial guards. The entire room immediately dropped to one knee in salute. "Continue," the Emperor commanded, taking a position at the edge of the training area. Craxus and Vorax resumed their positions, both now acutely aware of their father's presence. The stakes had just increased exponentially. "Begin," Master Zarkin said again, his voice tight with tension. This time, Craxus approached more cautiously, circling his younger brother and looking for weaknesses. Vorax maintained the defensive stance Miles had taught him, moving with surprising grace despite his disability. "Remember," Miles called out quietly to Vorax, "he expects nothing from your left side. Use that." The young prince gave an almost imperceptible nod. When Craxus finally attacked, it was with a feint followed by a powerful right cross. Vorax blocked the real attack with his forearm, absorbing the impact with a grimace but maintaining his position. Then, just as Miles had suggested countless times in their private sessions, Vorax did the unexpected. He threw a left hook. The punch wasn't powerful. Given the weakness in Vorax's left arm, it couldn't be. But it was perfectly timed and placed, catching Craxus on the jaw as he recovered from his own attack. The Crown Prince stumbled back a step, more from surprise than pain. A collective gasp went up from the observers. No one had ever seen Prince Vorax land a clean hit on any opponent, let alone his formidable older brother. Craxus's frills flared fully open, a sign of either extreme anger or respect in Drakari culture. For a tense moment, Miles feared the Crown Prince might lose control and escalate the demonstration to dangerous levels. Instead, Craxus did something unexpected. He straightened, brought his fists to center position as Miles had taught them, and nodded to his younger brother. "Well struck," he said, his voice carrying across the now silent training hall. Vorax's eyes widened in shock at the acknowledgement. He returned the gesture, bringing his own fists to center. "Thank you, brother." Emperor Talgoth stepped forward, his massive presence commanding immediate attention. "An impressive demonstration," he rumbled. "It seems there is merit in these human techniques after all." Master Zarkin bowed deeply. "Indeed, your Imperial Majesty. The humans' methods have unexpected applications." The Emperor's gaze fell on Miles. Combat Specialist Harper, your session appears to have been productive. I trust my sons are proving to be apt pupils. Miles bowed, still not entirely comfortable with the formality of Imperial protocol. They are exceptional students, Your Majesty. All 4 princes have natural talent for boxing. Even Vorax? Craxus asked, the question carrying layers of meaning. Especially Prince Vorax, Miles replied without hesitation. His unique physical configuration has forced him to develop adaptability and timing that can't be taught. With proper training, those qualities can become tremendous assets. The Emperor's expression remained impassive, but something like approval flickered in his ancient eyes. Continue your instruction, Combat Specialist. Master Zarkin, I expect full cooperation between your traditional methods and Specialist Harper's techniques. As you command, Your Majesty, the old combat master replied, bowing again. With that, Emperor Talgoth departed as suddenly as he had arrived, leaving a wake of whispers and speculation among the students. As the training session concluded, Miles noticed a change in the way the other princes regarded Vorax. There was still no warmth between them, but the open contempt had been replaced by something more like cautious reassessment. Not bad, half-scale, Temek said as they prepared to leave, using the old nickname, but without the usual mockery. That left hook was unexpected. Vorax straightened, meeting his brother's gaze directly. My name is Vorax, and there's more where that came from. Temek's frills rippled with surprise at the uncharacteristic backbone, but he merely nodded before following Craxus and Draven from the training hall. When the other students had dispersed, Vorax approached Miles, practically vibrating with excitement. Did you see their faces? They never expected me to land a hit on Craxus. Miles smiled, genuinely proud. You did exactly what we practiced. Used your opponent's expectations against them. This changes everything, Vorax said, his dull scales seeming somehow brighter. For the first time in my life, I didn't feel broken. You never were, Miles replied firmly. Different isn't broken. It just means you need different tools. Master Zarkin approached them, his ancient face unreadable. An interesting approach to combat. Human, he said. Unconventional, but apparently effective for Prince Vorax's unique situation. Thank you, Master Zarkin, Miles responded. I hope our methods can complement each other. The old combat master studied Miles for a long moment. Perhaps, he finally conceded. The Emperor sees something in you, human. I will reserve judgment until I understand what that is. With a formal nod to Vorax, he departed, his tail sweeping regally behind him. That's practically a ringing endorsement from Master Zarkin, Vorax whispered. He's never even acknowledged my presence before. Miles clapped the young prince on the shoulder. This is just the beginning, Your Highness. Just the beginning. Over the following weeks, Miles's position at Drakenheim Academy evolved from curiosity to established fixture. The initial resistance from the Drakari instructors gradually gave way to professional respect as they observed the results of his training methods, particularly with Prince Vorax. The young prince thrived under the combined regimen of traditional Drakari combat arts and adapted human boxing. His confidence grew daily, and with it came improvements in other areas of his royal education. His academic instructors reported increased participation in class discussions, and even his physical therapists noted better overall motor control. Miles's relationship with the other princes developed more slowly but steadily. Draven, the quietest of the brothers, was the first to seek additional training outside the mandated sessions. Temek followed suit a week later, intrigued by the footwork techniques that complemented his natural agility. Even Craxus, though maintaining a certain aloofness, began to treat Miles with grudging respect after witnessing the Crown Prince incorporate boxing movements into his traditional Drakari combat forms with devastating effectiveness. 6 weeks after Miles's promotion, Emperor Talgoth summoned him to the Imperial Study, a rare honor that set the palace gossip mill ablaze. The Emperor never invites outsiders to his private study, Vorax told Miles anxiously as they finished their evening training session. Not even most high counselors receive such privilege. Miles wiped sweat from his brow, trying to appear calmer than he felt. Any idea what he wants to discuss? The prince shook his head. Father rarely explains his motivations. But he hesitated. This could be very good or very bad. There's rarely middle ground with the emperor. Comforting, Miles muttered. That evening, an imperial guard escorted Miles through sections of the palace he'd never seen before. The architecture grew increasingly grand and ancient as they approached the emperor's private wing, the crystalline corridors giving way to massive structures of volcanic stone inlaid with precious metals and gems. The imperial study itself was surprisingly austere compared to the opulence of the corridors leading to it. Massive bookshelves lined the walls, filled with ancient tomes and modern data crystals alike. A large desk carved from a single piece of obsidian dominated the center of the room, its surface covered with maps, reports, and diplomatic communications. Emperor Talgoth stood by a floor-to-ceiling window that overlooked the capital city, his massive frame silhouetted against the 3 moons of Neva Prime. He did not turn when Miles entered. Combat Specialist Harper, the Emperor acknowledged. Your progress reports have been interesting reading. Miles remained near the door, unsure of proper protocol. Thank you, Your Imperial Majesty. You may approach, Talgoth said, finally turning from the window. In the dim light of the study, his black scales seemed to absorb the very shadows around him. And you may speak freely. We are not in court now. Miles stepped forward, stopping at what he hoped was a respectful distance. I appreciate the opportunity to speak with you directly, Your Majesty. The Emperor gestured to a stone bench near his desk. Sit. Your human physiology is not designed for our gravity. It must be tiring. Surprised by the consideration, Miles sat, while the Emperor remained standing. You have been teaching my sons for 6 weeks now, Talgoth said. Tell me your honest assessment of their progress. Begin with Craxus. Miles gathered his thoughts. Prince Craxus is naturally gifted. Strong, fast, and intelligent. He's incorporated boxing techniques into his traditional combat style very effectively. His only limitation is his reluctance to acknowledge when he doesn't understand something. Pride prevents him from asking questions, which sometimes slows his progress. The Emperor nodded, unsurprised. Temek. Creative and adaptive. He's particularly good at combining boxing footwork with Drakari tail techniques. His weakness is impatience. He wants to master everything immediately and gets frustrated with the repetitive practice required to build muscle memory. Draven. Methodical and precise. He analyzes everything before attempting it, which makes his learning curve slower initially but more thorough in the long run. He needs to trust his instincts more in combat situations rather than overthinking. The Emperor made a low rumbling sound of agreement. And Vorax? Miles straightened. Prince Vorax has made the most remarkable progress of all. His disability forced him to develop extraordinary spatial awareness and timing. He sees openings that others miss and has learned to maximize the effectiveness of his limited strength. What he lacks in raw power, he makes up for in precision and strategy. You believe he has potential as a warrior, then? The Emperor's tone was neutral, but the question carried weight. I believe Prince Vorax has the potential to be exceptional, Your Majesty, not despite his disability, but in ways uniquely enabled by it. His different perspective gives him advantages others don't have. Emperor Talgoth was silent for a long moment, studying Miles with ancient eyes that had witnessed centuries of imperial rule. An interesting perspective, combat specialist. One that contradicts thousands of years of Drakari tradition regarding physical perfection. Miles met the Emperor's gaze steadily. With respect, Your Majesty, tradition is valuable, but it should be a guide, not a prison. The greatest strength of any civilization is its ability to adapt. Bold words from an alien guest in our empire, Talgoth commented, but there was no anger in his voice, only contemplation. You asked for my honest assessment, Your Majesty. So I did. The Emperor moved to his desk and activated a holographic display embedded in its surface. Images of the 4 princes appeared, along with detailed performance metrics from their training sessions. Do you know why I have allowed, no, encouraged, Your unorthodox training of my sons, human? Miles shook his head. I assumed it was to help Prince Vorix find a combat style suited to his physical configuration. That was part of it, Talgoth acknowledged. But there was a greater purpose. The Emperor manipulated the holographic display, bringing up images of various alien species, some humanoid, others wildly different. The Drakari Empire spans 27 star systems and incorporates 15 sentient species, each with their own physiologies, abilities, and limitations. The Emperor continued, "For millennia, we have ruled through strength and tradition. But the galaxy is changing. New alliances form. Old enemies become trading partners. Diplomatic solutions sometimes prove more effective than military ones." Miles listened, fascinated by this unexpected glimpse into imperial politics. The future emperor must understand that strength takes many forms, Talgoth said, his voice taking on a contemplative quality. That different does not mean inferior. That adaptation and incorporation of foreign elements can strengthen rather than weaken. The implications slowly dawned on Miles. You weren't just teaching Prince Vorix to fight. You were teaching all your sons a lesson about leadership. The Emperor's frills rippled in what might have been approval. Precisely, human. And you were my unwitting instructor. Me? Miles blinked in surprise. When I first observed you training Vorix, I saw something remarkable. A human with no obligation to a Drakari prince, adapting your combat techniques to suit his needs, believing in his potential when his own family had dismissed him. Talgoth's ancient eyes fixed on Miles. You demonstrated exactly the qualities I wish my sons to develop as future leaders: adaptability, creativity, and the ability to see value where others see only weakness. Miles absorbed this revelation, understanding now why the Emperor had elevated him so suddenly and publicly. So my promotion was a deliberate message to my sons and the imperial court, Talgoth confirmed. By elevating a human maintenance worker to a position of respect and authority, I demonstrated that worth is not determined by species, tradition, or initial status. The Emperor returned to the window, gazing out at the sprawling capital. The Drakari must evolve if our empire is to thrive in the changing galaxy. My sons must lead that evolution. Miles sat in stunned silence, processing the implications of the Emperor's words. What had begun as simple boxing lessons for a disabled prince had become a pivotal moment in imperial politics. "There is something else you should know," Talgoth said after a moment. "The imperial succession trials begin in 3 days." Miles had heard whispers of the trials, an ancient tradition where the imperial princes competed in various challenges to demonstrate their readiness for eventual rulership. While the eldest son typically inherited the throne, exceptional performance in the trials could influence imperial appointments and responsibilities. "All 4 of my sons will participate," the Emperor continued, "including Vorix." Miles couldn't hide his surprise. "Vorix? But he's never been allowed to." "Times change," combat specialist Harper, Talgoth interrupted. "And so must traditions. Vorix will compete alongside his brothers, judged by the same standards. No allowances will be made for his condition." Miles felt a surge of protective concern. "Your Majesty, while Prince Vorix has made remarkable progress, the other princes have years of advanced training. Is it fair to—" "Fair?" The Emperor's laugh was like distant thunder. "The universe is not fair, human. Leadership is not about fairness, but about effectiveness. If Vorix cannot overcome challenges with the tools at his disposal, he is not suited for imperial responsibility. The same standard applies to all my sons." Miles nodded slowly, understanding the harsh but logical position. "May I continue training him until the trials begin?" "You may," Talgoth confirmed. "In fact, I am assigning you as his official second during the trials themselves. You will be permitted to advise him between challenges, though you cannot intervene directly." "I'm honored, Your Majesty," Miles said, genuinely moved by the trust this represented. The Emperor fixed him with a penetrating stare. "Do not mistake my actions for sentimentality, human. I do what is best for the Empire always." If Voryx fails, he fails. But he will have had the opportunity to succeed on his own merits, an opportunity he might never have received without your intervention. With that, the Emperor dismissed him with a regal nod. As Miles was escorted back through the ancient corridors, his mind raced with the implications of what he'd learned and the responsibility he now carried. The next morning, Miles found Prince Voryx already in the training hall before their scheduled session, practicing combinations on a striking post. "You heard about the trials?" Miles asked, though the prince's intense focus answered the question. Voryx nodded without pausing his strikes. "Father informed me last night. I am to participate fully." His voice was tight, with a mixture of excitement and apprehension. "How do you feel about that?" The prince finally stopped, turning to face Miles. Terrified, exhilarated, grateful. He flexed his weaker left arm. 3 months ago, I would have been humiliated at the mere suggestion of competing. Now, he straightened his shoulders. Now I at least have a fighting chance. Miles smiled. More than a chance. You've got skills your brothers don't even understand yet. I'll need them, Voryx said grimly. The trials aren't just combat challenges. There are tests of leadership, strategy, diplomatic negotiation, and ancestral knowledge. Craxus has been preparing his entire life. Then we've got a lot of work to do, Miles said, rolling up his sleeves. Your brothers have advantages in strength and experience, but they've never had to think differently or find creative solutions. That's your edge. For the next 3 days, Miles and Voryx trained intensively, focusing not just on combat techniques, but on applying the principles of boxing, timing, distance management, energy conservation, strategic thinking to broader challenges. Master Zarkin, in an unprecedented show of cooperation, joined several sessions, offering insights on how traditional Drakari approaches could be adapted to Voryx's unique needs. On the morning of the trials, the entire academy gathered in the ancient ceremonial arena at the heart of the Imperial Palace. Tiered seating surrounded a massive circular platform of volcanic stone, worn smooth by centuries of imperial ceremonies. Above the arena, holographic displays allowed the thousands of spectators to view the proceedings in detail. The 4 princes stood at the edge of the platform, each dressed in ceremonial armor bearing their personal insignia. Craxus's copper scales gleamed beneath armor of gold and obsidian. Temek and Draven wore silver and bronze respectively, their armor more elaborate than their youngest brother's simple gray outfit. Miles stood behind Voryx as his official second, feeling distinctly out of place in the formal imperial tunic he'd been provided for the occasion. Around the arena, the other princes' seconds, all high-ranking Drakari warriors, regarded the human with barely concealed disdain. Emperor Talgoth entered the arena to thunderous acclaim, his ceremonial regalia radiating imperial authority. He raised his hands, and immediate silence fell over the crowd. For 10,000 years, the Emperor's voice boomed across the arena. The sons of the imperial bloodline have proven their worth through the sacred trials. Today, my 4 sons continue this tradition, demonstrating their readiness to serve the Empire in whatever capacity they are called. The Emperor described the 5 challenges that would comprise the trials: the test of knowledge, the test of diplomacy, the test of strategy, the test of leadership, and finally, the test of combat. Each challenge would be scored by a panel of imperial judges, with the cumulative results determining each prince's standing. Let the trials commence, Talgoth declared, taking his position on the imperial observation platform. The test of knowledge came first, a public questioning on imperial history, law, and interstellar politics. As expected, Craxus excelled, his lifetime of intensive education evident in his confident answers. Temek and Draven performed admirably as well. To everyone's surprise, Voryx matched his brothers in many areas, particularly in questions regarding the Empire's diplomatic relations with other species. His different perspective on imperial policy, informed by his own experience as an outsider within Drakari culture, impressed the judges visibly. The test of diplomacy followed, with each prince required to negotiate a complex trade agreement with representatives from 3 different client species of the Empire. Here, Draven's methodical nature gave him an advantage, though Craxus's natural authority also served him well. Vorax, drawing on his experience of finding common ground despite differences, performed unexpectedly well, securing terms that balanced imperial interests with genuine benefits for the client species. By midday, the scoreboard showed Craxus in the lead, with Draven second, Vorax third, and Temek fourth, a ranking that caused murmurs of astonishment throughout the arena. The disabled prince had never been expected to place above last in any category. "You're doing brilliantly," Miles told Vorax during the brief recess before the test of strategy. "Your different perspective is actually giving you an edge in these challenges." The prince nodded, his expression focused. "The next test will be harder." Craxus has been studying military strategy since he could speak. The test of strategy proved Vorax right. Each prince was presented with a holographic battlefield scenario featuring Imperial forces facing a complex threat. Their tactical decisions were evaluated in real time, with the scenario adapting to their commands. Craxus's approach was textbook perfect, aggressive yet calculated, leveraging the Empire's superior forces to overwhelm the enemy through coordinated attacks. Draven and Temek employed similar tactics with minor variations. When Vorax's turn came, he studied the battlefield differently. Rather than focusing on the Imperial forces' strengths, he identified their vulnerabilities and positioned them to minimize exposure. Instead of seeking decisive victory through superior firepower, he created a series of strategic withdrawals that lured the enemy into increasingly disadvantageous positions. The judges conferred at length over this unorthodox approach. Finally, the head judge announced, "Prince Vorax's strategy demonstrates unusual conservation of Imperial resources while achieving the primary objective. While unconventional, the effectiveness cannot be denied." Craxus's frills flared in surprise as the scoreboard updated, showing him still in first place, but with Vorax now tied with Draven for second. The test of leadership came next. Each prince was assigned a team of academy cadets and given a complex construction challenge requiring coordination, delegation, and motivation. Here, the differences in leadership style became starkly apparent. Craxus led through authority and clear direction, his team responding to his confident commands with precision. Draven created a structured system with clearly defined roles. Temek inspired through enthusiasm and personal example. Vorax, limited in his ability to physically demonstrate tasks, was forced to communicate more thoroughly, explaining the reasoning behind his instructions and asking for input from team members with relevant skills. To everyone's surprise, his team displayed remarkable cohesion, with members taking initiative and supporting each other without constant direction. "Prince Vorax demonstrates adaptive leadership," the head judge commented. "Rather than imposing authority, he creates conditions for team success through mutual support." As the scoreboard updated again, gasps echoed through the arena. While Craxus maintained his lead, Vorax had moved into clear second place, with Draven third and Temek fourth. The final challenge, the test of combat, would be decisive. During the preparation period before the combat test, Craxus approached Vorax in the ready area, his copper scales gleaming with ceremonial oils. "You've surprised everyone today, Half-Scale," the Crown Prince said, using the old nickname but without malice. "Father looks pleased." Vorax straightened. "I've had good training." Craxus's eyes flicked to Miles, who stood nearby. "Yes, you have." After a moment's hesitation, he added, "Whatever happens in the combat arena, you've earned respect today. Remember that." Before Vorax could respond, Craxus rejoined his seconds, leaving the younger prince staring after him in shock. "Did my brother just give me a compliment?" he asked Miles incredulously. Miles smiled. "I think he just acknowledged you as a worthy opponent." "That's significant progress." The test of combat was structured as a tournament, with the four princes drawing lots to determine their initial opponents. Fate, or perhaps Imperial intervention, paired Vorax against Temek in the first round, with Craxus facing Draven. The combat rules were simple. Victory could be achieved through submission, rendering the opponent unconscious, or or driving them from the arena platform. Lethal force was forbidden, but otherwise, the princes could use any combat technique at their disposal. Miles's final advice to Vorax was succinct. Remember everything we've practiced. Use your differences as advantages. And most importantly, don't fight Temek's fight. Make him fight yours. Temek and Vorax took their positions on the platform. The size difference between them was dramatic. Temek stood a full head taller than his younger brother, his silver scales unblemished and his musculature perfect. At the Emperor's signal, the match began. Temek immediately pressed forward with aggressive Drakari combat forms, his tail whipping in powerful arcs designed to unbalance his opponent. Vorax, rather than attempting to counter with similar techniques, employed the boxing footwork Miles had taught him, creating angles and distance that neutralized his brother's reach advantage. The crowd watched in fascination as the disabled prince moved with unexpected grace, his weaker left side positioned defensively, while his stronger right launched precise counterattacks when opportunities arose. Temek grew increasingly frustrated as his attacks met empty air or were deflected by Vorax's guard. When he overextended on a powerful strike, Vorax executed a perfect slip-in counter combination, landing a solid hit to Temek's midsection that audibly expelled air from the larger prince's lungs. Stung by the successful counter, Temek abandoned technical fighting for raw aggression, charging forward with a roar. It was exactly what Vorax had been waiting for. Sidestepping the charge, he used his brother's momentum against him, delivering a perfectly timed hook that connected with Temek's temple as he passed. The larger prince stumbled, momentarily disoriented. Vorax pressed his advantage, not with wild attacks, but with a measured series of strikes that forced Temek toward the edge of the platform. A final perfectly executed combination, jab, cross, body hook, sent Temek tumbling over the edge to the shock and amazement of the crowd. Silence fell over the arena, then erupted into thunderous applause. Vorax stood at the center of the platform, breathing hard but upright, his dull gray scales gleaming with exertion. He'd achieved something no one had thought possible: victory in single combat against a physically superior opponent. In the second match, Craxus defeated Draven through superior technique and power, setting up a final confrontation between the Crown Prince and the youngest Imperial son, a matchup no one had anticipated at the start of the trials. As Vorax returned to the preparation area, Miles greeted him with undisguised pride. That was textbook perfect execution. Everything we practiced, you applied flawlessly. The prince nodded, accepting a hydration pouch from an attendant. Craxus will be different. He's watched me fight now. He'll adapt. So will you, Miles replied confidently. You've already exceeded everyone's expectations. Whatever happens next, you've proven your worth. When the final match began, the atmosphere in the arena was electric. Craxus approached the center with regal confidence, his copper scales catching the light dramatically. Across from him, Vorax looked small and unimposing, his patchy gray scales and thinner left arm a stark contrast to his brother's perfection. Yet there was something different about the youngest prince now, a quiet confidence that hadn't been there before. He met his eldest brother's gaze steadily, without fear or resentment. "Fight well, brother," Craxus said formally, bringing his fist to his chest in the traditional Drakari salute. "And you?" Vorax replied, mirroring the gesture with his good arm. At the Emperor's signal, they began. Unlike Temek, Craxus didn't rush in with overwhelming aggression. He circled cautiously, studying Vorax's movement patterns and testing his defenses with measured strikes. The fight that followed became legendary in Drakari history. Craxus attacked with textbook precision, using his superior strength and training to pressure his younger brother relentlessly. But Vorax defended with extraordinary discipline, using the economy of movement Miles had drilled into him to conserve energy while looking for openings. As the match progressed, something remarkable happened. The crowd began to cheer not just for Craxus, the perfect Drakari warrior, but for Vorax as well. Each successful defense, each clever counter by the disabled prince drew appreciative roars from the spectators. In the final moments, with both princes exhausted, Craxus launched a powerful combination that would have overwhelmed most opponents. Vorax slipped the main attack, but took a glancing blow that sent him stumbling backward. Rather than pressing forward recklessly, Craxus paused, giving his brother a chance to recover. Why? Vorax gasped, regaining his stance. Because this is about proving worth, not destroying each other, Craxus replied. And you have proven yours today, brother. With newfound mutual respect, they engaged in one final exchange. Vorax, using everything Miles had taught him, landed a perfect cross-counter that staggered the Crown Prince. But before he could follow up, the Emperor's voice thundered across the arena. Enough! The trial is complete. Both princes immediately stopped, turning to face their father. Emperor Talgoth descended to the platform, his ancient eyes evaluating both his sons. Craxus, the Emperor proclaimed, you have demonstrated the strength and skill expected of the heir to the throne. Your victory in the trials is acknowledged. The Crown Prince bowed deeply. Vorax, Talgoth continued, you have shown that different does not mean lesser. Your unique perspective and adaptability will serve the Empire in ways we have not yet imagined. Therefore, I name you Imperial Diplomatic Envoy, the Empire's voice to foreign worlds. Gasps echoed through the arena. This was an unprecedented honor for the youngest prince, previously considered unfit for any imperial role. Together, the Emperor declared, placing one massive hand on each son's shoulder, you represent the future of the Drakari Empire, tradition and innovation in harmony. As the crowd erupted in thunderous approval, Miles caught Vorax's eye from the sidelines. The once bullied, underestimated prince stood tall among his peers, his dull scales gleaming with purpose rather than shame. 6 months later, as Miles prepared the prince's team for their first diplomatic mission, he reflected on how far they had come. From janitor and outcast to respected trainer and envoy, their journey had transformed not just their own lives, but begun to change an empire. Ready, Imperial Envoy? Miles asked with a grin. Vorax nodded, confidence now as natural to him as breathing. Thanks to you, old friend. Thanks to you. And that was the end of the story. If you listened all the way to here, don't forget to leave feedback about what you thought of the story in the comments, whether positive or negative. Your feedback helps us improve. Also leave your like and subscribe to the channel for more stories like this one. And I'll leave here on the screen another video that I'm sure you'll like. Big hug, and see you in the next story.